In this video, I'll explain the basic concepts of AWS regions and availability zones. So let's start with regions. What is an AWS region? Well, it's simply a geographic area, like for example, the North Virginia region or the California region. These are basically just geographic areas in which AWS has built data centers. And the regions are dynamic. They might change over time. Well, regions don't really go away, but new regions are added as time goes on. And the regions are different from one another. So regions may or may not provide all AWS services. And typically the way that AWS rolls out newer services is they roll them out in a single region or in a small set of regions. And then eventually those services may become available in the other regions. So just understand that when you're picking a region, not all regions are created equal. Some may have different services than others. And by the way, services have different costs in different regions as well. So for example, if I'm getting an EC2 instance in the US East Virginia region, that same instance may have a different price in the US West California region. So within each of these regions, we have multiple availability zones. And think of an availability zone as a data center or a set of data centers within that region. And every single region has at least 2 availability zones. The purpose of these availability zones is to provide redundancy within that region. So let's take a look at a diagram of these regions and availability zones. And let's just focus on the US East North Virginia region. Pretty much the biggest region that AWS has. And within this region, there are 6 different availability zones. And each availability zone is a set of physical data centers. And each availability zone has different power grids, different network providers than the other availability zones. So it's very unlikely that 2 availability zones will fail simultaneously. And so if I'm running an EC2 instance in a single availability zone, that availability zone may fail. But it's very unlikely that if I'm also running an instance in another availability zone, that both availability zones will fail at once. So what we can do is we can load balance across EC2 instances in 2 different availability zones, making it very unlikely that my application will actually be down because I'll probably have one of those instances up in one of those availability zones all the time. And so that's the purpose of availability zones, is to give me the opportunity to make my applications highly available within an AWS region. And then beyond that, we've got edge locations. Edge locations are spread all over the world, and they are primarily used by an AWS service called CloudFront. CloudFront is going to speed up delivery of your web content, things like videos and websites and things like that. They're going to distribute that content all over the world so that regardless of where your users are coming from, they can get fast access to your content from their nearest edge location. And so you could have your website hosted in EC2. You could have your website hosted inside of your on-premises data center. You could have web resources inside of an S3 bucket. CloudFront is going to work with any of these AWS services to improve the overall speed and responsiveness of your website. So let's take a few moments to look at the AWS Global Infrastructure on the AWS website. And we can see at the moment right now we have 27 AWS regions with 87 availability zones and 400 plus edge locations. So this is always changing. AWS is ever expanding. And I can see the map here of the regions and availability zones. So within North America, we have the US West Oregon, we have US West California, we have US East North Virginia, and we have US East Ohio. We also have a region in Canada, and we have GovCloud, which are reserved for government use only. And so within North America, there's many different regions that we can choose from. And North Virginia is the oldest region, and it has the most availability zones. And then if we scroll down here, we can see all of the edge locations that can be used by CloudFront to speed up the delivery of web resources. So for example, if I have a user in Boston, Massachusetts, that user is physically pretty far from the North California region. And so if my website is hosted in North California and I've got a bunch of images there, I can cache those images at an edge location in Boston and improve the overall responsiveness of my website for those users. So at this point, the critical concepts for you to understand are that there are many different regions. Within those regions, we have multiple availability zones. And we also have edge locations as well. Edge locations are different than the rest. Edge locations are just for use by services like CloudFront to speed things up.